All right, I had to split the previous day into two episodes. All right, I'm messing with this cord. Sorry about that. All right, split the previous day into two episodes. So we're on day 11 now, but it's gonna be episode 12. But we just gonna consolidate them. Just make it 12. Episode 12. Post Ferguson, August 25th, 2014. As the body of Michael Brown is consigned to the earth, network newscasters and broadcasters are packing their gear, checking out of their hotel rooms, and setting their sights on new stories to chase. That the tragic saga in Ferguson struck national newscasters is rare, indeed unprecedented, given the length and depth of the story. But to reporters, stories come and stories go. And the Ferguson story seems to be going. Part of the reason has been the incessant media chant for the expulsion of so-called, quote, outside agitators, end quote, seen as violence-prone troublemakers coming on the scene. Once they were gone, tensions drained away like an unwanted migraine. But, quote, creative tension, end quote, in the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., is the very stuff that animates protest and helps fuel movements. It is the job of the managerial class of lawyers, preachers, and politicians to reduce tensions, to de-radicalize movements, to make them manageable and compliant. And once they become manageable, they lose their mass base and their social power. For the masses know the essential nature of the police. They see them, engage them daily in their communities. They know they are often violent, vicious, and venal government officials, and they are hungry, anxious to oppose them. Movements are a lot like volcanoes, which appear dormant or sleeping. Unseen are underground forces, churning, boiling, crashing like waves against a hidden shore, until one day, usually a day none had foreseen, they erupt, splashing red molten rage over miles, changing everything. That's what movements do and what they are. If hot enough, they can change everything. Everything. But political, media, and state forces don't want change. They want continuity, for therein lies both their profits and their power, and who wants to lose either of those things? Thus, the tragedy of Ferguson will be stuffed back into the pillow of forgetfulness. Until next time. The Meaning of Ferguson, August 31st, 2014. Before cops killed Michael Brown, who among us had ever heard of Ferguson, Missouri? Because of what happened there, the brief but intense experience of state repression, its name will be transmitted by millions of black mouths to millions of black ears, and it will become a watchword for resistance, like Watts, like Newark, Harlem, and Los Angeles. But Ferguson isn't a thing from the last century, it's now. For young blacks from Ferguson and beyond, it offers stark and vivid lessons in contemporary political and social realities. When black youth dare protest the state's street murder of one of their own, the government responded with the tools and weapons of war. They assaulted free speech with gas. They attacked freedom to assemble as if Ferguson were Fallujah, Iraq. The police acted as if they were an occupying army from another country, for that, in fact, is what they were. And these young folks learn viscerally, face to face, what the white nation thinks of them, their constitutional rights, their so-called freedoms, and their lives. They learn the wages of black protest, repression, repression, and more repression. They also learn the limits of their so-called, quote, leaders, end quote, who called for, quote, peace, end quote, and, quote, calm, end quote, while armored troops train automatic weapons and sniper rifles on unarmed American men, women, and children. Russian revolutionary leader V.I. Lenin once said, quote, there are decades when nothing happens. There are weeks when decades happen, end quote. For the youth, excluded from the U.S. economy by inferior, substandard education, targeted by the malevolence of the fake drug war and mass incarceration, stopped and frisked for walking while black, were given front row seats to the national security state at Ferguson after a friend was murdered by police in their streets. Ferguson may prove a wake-up call that Black Lives Matter, a call for youth to build social, radical, revolutionary movements for change. Okay, that gets us to the end of the passage of the meaning of Ferguson. And so I read both of those Ferguson passages together before taking some time to reflect. And I think the first thing that comes to my mind is this statement. Oh, let me go here. This statement: there are decades when nothing happens. There are weeks when decades happen. And when I look back on the weeks that followed the murder of George Floyd, the weeks that followed May 30th in Rockford, Illinois, decades happened in those weeks. When I think about the months that followed those things, it feels as if years passed in those months. And I think that is something that has to be understood in movement building and grassroots movement building as well, is that there are moments where it seems as if there's no type of movement of the needle, or there's no type of progress, or no type of furthering of advancing past the issues. And then in a split second, in a moment that nobody can know beforehand, and nobody can be aware will happen before it happens, a bunch of progress is possible, or a bunch of progress is made. And I think that the thing that we have to be the most concerned about as grassroots organizers, as grassroots movement building, is making sure that we have a platform built for when that moment arises, to make sure that we are in a position to capitalize from those moments when they arise. And so that way we can make sure that within weeks, years take place, that within months, years take place. And I think that another one of the things that stands out to me in the passages is in the passage that's entitled Post-Ferguson, when Mami Abu-Jamal states, movements are a lot like volcanoes which appear dormant or sleeping. Unseen are underground forces churning, boiling, crashing like waves against the hidden shore, until one day, usually a day none have foreseen, they erupt, splashing red molten rage over miles, changing everything. And again, that is the reason why I believe, personally, ideologically, there is an importance to us continuing on the occupation of the City Hall in Rockford, Illinois, that there is a purpose in us continuing on this struggle against police terrorism and mass incarceration in Rockford, Illinois, because that is what movements are like, because movements are like volcanoes that lie dormant while things internally are happening to eventually get you to a place where there is a manifestation externally of some of these issues. And so every day we are working to get towards that point. And those are all things that I learned from last year, and from what went on after George Floyd was murdered, and from what went on after May 30th in Rockford, Illinois. I learned the importance of, sorry if this cord is causing some kind of feedback, but I learned the importance of movement building. I learned the importance of being patient, the importance of slow motion being better than no motion, of taking it a day at a time, of understanding that this is a marathon and not a sprint. And that is the number one weapon, number one instrument that I think that we have to have and to utilize. And I think that one of the sayings that I've heard that I continue to harken back on as well is if they have the watches, then we have the time, which sort of, in my opinion, goes to the point of they may have, the power to keep track of the time and to watch the time, but as long as they are willing to wait and watch the time and keep track of the time from that position of power, we are also willing, to wait and to, and I think I sort of should have just said the analogy without trying to break it down. All right. Okay, let's move on to the next passage. We must fight for more. September 21st, 2014. Thanks to the corporate media, Ferguson, Missouri has been all but forgotten. Other sensationalist fare now fills the air with empty fluff about missing... Oh. Is this where I'm at? My fault, y'all. My fault. I think I'm trying to make sure I ain't... Okay, yeah. Okay, this is the next passage. My fault. Next passage. We must fight for more. September 21st, 2014. Thanks to the corporate media, Ferguson, Missouri has been all but forgotten. Other sensationalist fare now fills the air with empty fluff about missing white women, snuff videos, and other mindlessness to further stoke public fear. But to thousands of young black people, Ferguson is as close as teeth are to the tongue. They witnessed with their own eyes how young people, just like them, were treated by the armed forces of the state. The authorities' antipathy, their racist hatred, their weapons of war pointed at the people will not soon be forgotten. They also saw the stark emptiness of black politicians who, unable to resolve the crisis of the hour, uttered inanities about, quote, body cams, end quote, proof positive that they don't really live in the same world as those they claim to represent. Some called for, quote, community policing, end quote, a phrase and concept as empty as the one before it, which simply means that police surveillance of black people is more invasive than ever before, with the same violent repression. Oh, excuse me. I hope that ain't made nobody else listening, y'all. My fault. The term is a perversion of a struggle once waged by the Black Panther Party. Quote, community control of police, end quote. In fact, in February 1980, Dr. Huey P. Newton, a Black Panther co-founder, called for the establishment of a, quote, citizens' peace force, end quote, a force far different from the units we see today. Huey wrote, the working model for the new peace force resembles, in many ways, a citizens' militia. Conscription would mean drafting people from conclamatic districts to serve 2-year terms in their own community. Young people from age 15 could serve part-time and no upward age or sex limit need arbitrarily imposed. Basic training for draftees would reach out to ongoing schooling and various skills for those who were not returning to either jobs or school. Dr. Huey P. Newton wrote that the Peace Force's linchpin would be, quote, civilian control, end quote. No present politician, from president to dog catcher, has come close to Huey's insight or the progress of the Black Panther Party from the late 1970s to 1980. None. History lives to give us options for the future. It lives to inspire us with visions of the possible. A new, militant, and responsive politics must arise, energized by the young who are clear-eyed and committed. We must fight for more, or we'll get more Fergusons, only worse. And so in that passage, Mami Abu-Jamal brings up two forms of reform that have been highly touted since the murder of George Floyd, and that is body cameras and also community policing. And so we have seen here in Rockford, Illinois, after May 30th, 2020, and after the uprising that took place during the spring and summer of last year, that body cameras were the only concession or the only thing that the city of Rockford and the Rockford Police Department were willing to implement or were willing to begin to assimilate into their institution, assimilate into their system. And I 100% agree with Mami Abu-Jamal that the simply adding a body camera or simply putting a camera on a police officer does not address or absolve us of the issues of police terrorism, mass incarceration, and racial injustice. And because part of the problem is that hinges on the fact that if people see these things, all of a sudden they'll change their perception of these things. And in truth, people have seen for decades, maybe not at the rate that they see now, but they have seen for decades the violence that has been done by police onto communities of color and working class and poor communities. What we have to do is begin to do the work of changing the perception of the community, changing the perception of the society to these issues. We have to begin to do the work of creating new systems, of new institutions, new organizations to deal with the root issues, to deal with the causes of these issues, instead of continuing to try to reform institutions that deal with the effects of these issues. And so I think that those were two things, and those are two, again, community policing and body cameras are reforms that are pushed heavily to people. And I think that that's why we have to do the job of explaining to people that these, as long as somebody is telling you body cameras is their solution to these issues and to these problems, and not that body cameras are a step and getting closer to solutions for these issues and these problems. They are trying to bamboozle you and hoodwink you. And I think that that is what we have to do. I'm not by any means saying that there shouldn't be body cameras. In 2021, every fucking police officer should have a body camera and dash camera attached to them. However, we have to begin to make sure that the community and that the people have access to these body cameras and to these videos. We have to begin to make sure that the society has a different perception of what they will see on these body cameras and these videos. We have to begin to make sure that there is things set in place, that there are consequences and some type of guaranteed reactions to the things that we as community members will see on these body cameras and in these videos. And so that is the main thing that sort of I take away from that passage that we just read, and Have Black Lives Ever Mattered by Mumia Abu-Jamal. All right, I know that that bus is a little loud. We outside. For anybody who don't know, we are currently occupying the City Hall in Rockford, Illinois, to bring awareness to police terrorism, mass incarceration, and racial injustice. I'm going to take a moment to end this passage here, and then I'm going to pick back up. I'm going to make sure that we do not have to split it up into 2 episodes. That's my fault, y'all. That's my fault. So I will be back. All right. We are continuing on. The Troy Davis tragedy, October 13th, 2014. If the name of Troy Davis is known to many, it is largely because of media coverage. But the details of his epic struggle and the denial of state and federal courts to seriously hear his claims are much less known. Read I Am Troy Davis by Jim Marlowe, Martina Davis Corella, and Troy Anthony Davis. The book focuses on the Davis family and reveals how the denial of justice tore the family apart. It is a tale of misplaced vengeance, of political opportunism, judicial cowardice, and relentless struggle. It is also a tale of courage against great adversity, tragedy, and political betrayals like those of Savannah's black district attorney who echoed his white predecessors. When Troy Davis was arrested on August 23, 1989, it was because he turned himself in after his sister told him about the case. He presented himself to police because he was certain that he would be cleared of any connection with the murder of a Savannah, Georgia cop. But the city, using coercive threats and fear, assembled an ignoble chorus of night people to sell their version of the events, and he was speedily convicted and doomed to Georgia's death row. Troy's sister, Martina Davis Corella, fought virtually alone to defend her younger brother's innocence and to find qualified lawyers to take the case for long, hard years. When a team of lawyers took the case, it was in shambles, and it took digging to find the truth. That Troy Davis was indeed innocent, and police have forced people to either testify against Troy or face charges of being accomplices to the homicide. Nonetheless, almost all the witnesses recanted, casting serious doubt on the conviction, telling of the threats they received at the station. A turning point came on August 17, 2009, when the U.S. Supreme Court, in a rare ruling, sent the case back to Georgia's federal court for an evidentiary hearing. At last, the evidence came in. Mass recantations, including new witnesses attesting to Davis's innocence. But none of it was enough to sway Georgia federal judge William Moore, who tossed out most of the evidence, finding recanted testimony, quote, unworthy of belief, end quote. The ups and downs of judicial fortune raised the hopes of Troy's mother, Virginia, a deeply spiritual, prayerful woman, his sister, Martina, and the rest of the family, only to dash them against the rocks of despair. On April 12, 2011, Virginia Davis passed away. On September 21, 2011, Troy Anthony Davis was killed by the state of Georgia. On December 1, 2011, Martina Davis Corella died after a decade-long fight against cancer. Troy Davis died from a broken judicial system. Virginia and Martina died of broken hearts. And then that is a story of Troy Davis, which brings us back into speaking of the macro aggressions of mass incarceration. And as we have read regularly throughout the passages and Have Black Lives Ever Matter by Mumia Abu-Jamal, false convictions, unjust convictions, unlawful convictions are an effect of mass incarceration. When you have a prison industrial complex that sees human beings as systems and numbers, when you have institution of policing that sees people of color as all as guilty as criminals, you get into a place where you begin to have collateral damage, and you begin to have people who are innocent and inside of this system and victims of this system. And so those are the things that I think of as we read through those passages. And as we've said, we've seen those things manifest even here in Winnebago County with wrongful convictions. So let's move to the next passage. Place names of black pain, loss, and death. November 24th, 2014. Like a fever, the news broke, but unlike a fever, it brought no relief. For the news, from the perspective of the national black community, wasn't good. The 12-member grand jury in Ferguson, investigating the killing of a black teenager, Michael Brown, voted for a, quote, no true bill, end quote, legalese for no charges against the police officer who shot and killed Brown. Despite the fact that Brown was unarmed, no charges, no case, no trial. The name Ferguson joins an ancient line of place names of black pain, loss, and death. Places like Birmingham, Tulsa, Selma, St. Louis, New York, Philadelphia, and now Ferguson. It will have a meaning all its own. For young people who felt compelled to hit the streets in protest of unbridled police power and legalized impunity, the challenge will be how to continue, how to fight on, and even what the fight is. Some, brokenhearted, will flee this ugly episode and try to seal such a memory away. Others will grow in radicalism, convinced that this case is the very epitome of racist injustice. Ferguson may prove a turning point. History may one day look back on it as a flashpoint in time when the people decided that the normalization of police violence and impunity had become intolerable. And so, again, as we've read multiple times throughout this book, there is another police officer who has no accountability for his actions, a police officer who a grand jury refuses to indict. There's a saying that goes, if a prosecutor wants, they could indict a ham sandwich. So the fact that there is no indictment for the man who murdered Michael Brown goes to show that the prosecutor did not want it to be an indictment, that the prosecutor was protecting the right of this police officer to murder Michael Brown in the streets. And one of the things I want to continue to harken back on is Michael Brown's murder is the macro aggression of police terrorism, as the murder and the execution of Troy Davis is a macro aggression of mass incarceration. And I think that these macro aggressions, when people are executed and when people have their lives stolen away by police officers or from state-sanctioned violence, I think these macro aggressions, again, have to be our rallying cry, the thing that we organize people around and mobilize people around. But we have to, once we have people mobilized and organized around those things, educate ourselves on the microaggressions and educate ourselves on the other intricacies of these institutions that lead to these macroaggressions happening. So this book, in my opinion, all of these different stories, all of these different events that have taken place in all of these different areas are all rallying cries for us to understand that no matter what city you live in, no matter what age you are, no matter what class you may fall in, that these issues of police terrorism and mass incarceration can be manifested on any of us as long as we continue to live in a society that is fueled by police terrorism and mass incarceration. Next passage. Rule of law. November 26th, 2014. In the ashy aftermath of Ferguson, Missouri, after more than 170 cities in the United States faced spirited and sometimes violent protests, it was disturbing in the extreme to hear President Barack Obama come out and call for respect for the, quote, rule of law, end quote. In his case, it was particularly ironic given the fact that when he was born, it was at a time when the very marriage of his white mother and black father was still a crime in many U.S. states. Indeed, it was only in 1967, in the Loving versus Virginia case, that anti-miscegenation laws, at the time the law in some 16 states, were struck down. At the time, Obama was a 6-year-old boy. In some parts of the United States, Barack Obama's very birth was considered a crime. Interracial marriage was against the law in roughly a third of the nation, and in those places, wasn't that the, quote, rule of law, end quote? For law can be just or unjust. Dr. Huey P. Newton said, quote, the law must serve men, not men serve the law, end quote. John Africa, founder of the MOVE organization, said, quote, just because it's legal doesn't make it right, end quote. In a nation that legally enslaved Africans for centuries, one that exploited, raped, lynched, and disenfranchised black folks, the rule of law means different things to different people. We readily forget that Germany's detention and mass killing of Jews, Romani, Sinti, and Poles was legal. Apartheid in South Africa was legal. Quote, stop and frisk, end quote, until quite recently was perfectly legal. All were allowable under the, quote, rule of law, end quote. It took long, bitter, and sometimes violent protests to bring these injustices to light and then begin to change them. The late Dr. Nelson Mandela was, we forget, a lawyer, but he became the head of the military wing of the African National Congress to fight against the unjust system of apartheid. He knew intimately about the, quote, rule of law, end quote. That's why he fought so relentlessly and why he chose armed struggle. He knew the keen limits of the, quote, rule of law, end quote. And so, as we read through that passage, I think the first thing that stands out to me is, one of the things I think about is a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. that's along the lines of the quotes from John Africa and the quote from, who was the other quote in here from? That's along the same. My fault. Somebody just drove by. Dude just drove by that was at the Back to Blue protest and had assaulted somebody at the Back to Blue protest. I can't remember what his name is, bald dude. And then he driving by listening to an America song, like a song about proud to be an American or some shit. Man, racist motherfuckers is crazy, dog. Okay. Nelson Mandela. Okay. Was it Nelson Mandela? Look at this. Huey Newton. Okay. Huey Newton and John Africa both had statements about the justness and unjustness of laws. And that makes me think back to a statement from Dr. Martin Luther King, who said that there were just laws and unjust laws, and that he wouldn't advocate for anybody to break just laws, but he would advocate for people to break unjust laws, and that breaking an unjust law was just as fundamental as upholding a just law. He said that just laws were laws that were in accordance with mankind and that uplifted human dignity, and that unjust laws were against the accordance of mankind, against the nature of mankind, and degraded, dignity. And so he spoke about how segregation laws were against the natural order of mankind, and how segregation laws degraded or gave degradation to human dignity by making black people feel inferior and people of color feel inferior. And so I think that is one of the things that we have to keep in mind when we know when something is legal or illegal in a state, or legal or illegal in a city, or legal or illegal in a country, is that we live in a country that was founded upon genocide, and the genocide of the indigenous people of this country was legal. We live in a country that was founded upon chattel slavery, and the chattel slavery of the Africans in this country was legal. It was legal for women to not have a right to vote. It was legal for men to marry girls that were 14, 15 in states. There's all type of things that have been legal within this country that, when we look at the laws of mankind, are unjust. And so I think that is a balancing act between understanding the realities of what is legal and illegal in the society we live in, and trying to struggle to get to a place of higher consciousness where we are thinking about what is just and unjust in accordance with mankind. And then let's read another passage. Ferguson fallout, November 30th, 2014. Ferguson, Missouri has become a launch point not just for the youth of that city, but for youth across the nation. They have stood up to automatic weapons, to hostile media, to their critical elders, and to an unresponsive federal government. They have stood in the torrid heat and the frozen snow. On Black Friday, they protested in more than 170 cities, advocating that Black Americans refrain from shopping while millions mourn. They are not all Black, yet most are youth, and their passion, joined with their will, is rewriting history. They are unwilling to stop, for the forces they are facing are unwilling to stop. Their splendid example is irradiating around the world, touching minds and souls in Paris, in London, in Havana, in Lagos, in Rio, and beyond. They are standing still. Next passage. Quote, Operation Restore Trust, end quote, December 2nd, 2014. The flames of Ferguson have eaten their fill, and its eerie glow has cast light on the impotence of those in the Black political class who cannot seem to solve any of the problems plaguing Black America. Usually, when they speak, they seem to be ventriloquists who mouth the words of white politicians, drowning the deep concerns of their constituents in an ocean of empty words. Now, a collection of prominent officials, from the U.S. president on down, have announced their intention to seriously tackle the issue of police abuse in Black communities. Politicians, police officials, clergy, and community organizers are part of a coterie of people who have come together to restore trust between cops and the African American community. When I saw this on TV, my head swiveled. Restore trust? One wonders where there ever was trust between American Blacks and cops in the first place. The cruel and painful history of relations between police and people of color is one of predation, not trust. Notably, Black police officers are part of this discussion. Black police officers are part of this discussion, but are we to make note of the fact that throughout many communities over many years, they were forbidden to arrest white people? Police are stationed in Black neighborhoods, but not to, quote, serve and protect, end quote, Black people or their property. They are there to control Black mobility and to discipline Blacks in an attempt to minimize any threat that could be posed to white wealth and sense of security, period. That's the real situation. Unlike the fairy tale discussions about, quote, restoring trust, end quote. For what trust can exist between oppressors and those they oppress? Nor can body cams be the great solution that their supporters suggest. Recall that cameras caught, with crystal clarity, the brutal cop beatings of Rodney King in Los Angeles, and before him, Delbert Africa in Philadelphia. Despite these captures on camera, both cases were thrown out, one by a jury, another by a judge. So much for cameras, huh? Who can trust the force that killed Black Panther leader Fred Hampton in his sleep? Who can trust an agency that bombed Black families and their babies in 1985? How can you restore something that's never existed? Until systems change, until cops are equally accountable to the same laws as everyone else, talk about, quote, restoring trust, end quote, is just that, talk. And so Again, Mamiya is hearkening on the fact that just simply having body cameras is not going to absolve us of these issues. One of the things that I've stated about these body cameras regularly is that we are in a time we cannot allow for our technology to surpass our human empathy, to surpass our humanity. And that is what is happening, is that we have this technology that can now, in 4K, crystal clarity, high definition, straight to your phone the moment that it happens, show you police terrorism being enacted, show you acts of violence that police officers are doing against members of the community. But if we are not in a place where we are empathetic towards these members of the community, if we are not in a place where we understand why the members of the community that are marginalized, if we aren't in a place where we understand the history of the institution of policing and how these things have been done for generations to civilians in our society, then watching those videos will change nothing, because we will still have the perception that the people that are having this violence enacted upon them deserve it for some reason. That if we can just make sure we don't do the things that they did in the video, that we can dodge and move around this police terrorism and this mass incarceration and racial injustice. And so in accordance with these body cameras being rolled out, we have to get into a place where our perception of these institutions of policing are become different. And then once that happens, we can get into a place where we can begin to create new institutions, create new ways for us to adequately address some of these issues and some of these root issues and some of the causes, instead of continuing to allow institutions that exist now to address those effects. So that is, again, Have Black Lives Ever Matter by Mamiya Abu-Jamal. We're about two-thirds of the way through the book, so we got like a third of the book left. Probably a little bit less than that. So please share this on whatever platform that you're listening to it on. I want to thank you for taking the time to listen. Again, we put these out on a daily basis to provide everybody an opportunity to begin their journey on the struggle to end police terrorism, mass incarceration, and racial injustice daily, and to provide people a daily opportunity to further their journey on the struggle to end police terrorism, mass incarceration, and racial injustice. All right, I'm going to wrap this up. We outside.